Half undressed, I tossed the powder into a glass and drank it off. It effervesced and became a fluorescent amber color. Before I was in bed, my mind was already tranquilized. I felt the pillow at my cheek, and thereupon I must have fallen asleep. And here we begin part 2, a shorter part, of the story of the late Mr. Elvesham by H.G. Wells. I woke abruptly out of a dream of strange beasts and found myself lying on my back. Probably everyone knows that dismal emotional dream from which one escapes, awake indeed, but strangely cowed. There was a curious taste in my mouth, a tired feeling in my limbs, a sense of cutaneous discomfort. I lay with my head motionless on my pillow, expecting that my feeling of strangeness and terror would pass away, and that I should then soon doze off again to sleep. But instead of that, my uncanny sensations increased. At first I could perceive nothing wrong about me. There was a faint light in the room, so faint that it was the very next thing to darkness. And the furniture stood out in it as vague lots of absolute darkness. I stared with my eyes just over the bedclothes. It came into my mind that someone had entered the room to rob me of my rouleau of money, but after lying for some moments, breathing regularly to simulate sleep, I realized this was mere fantasy. Nevertheless, the uneasy assurance of something wrong kept fast hold of me. With an effort, I raised my head from the pillow and peered about me in the dark. What was it? I could not conceive. I looked at the dim shapes around me, the greater and lesser darknesses that indicated curtains, table, fireplace, bookshelves, and so forth. Then I began to perceive something unfamiliar in the forms of the darkness. Had the bed been turned around? Yonder should be the bookshelves, and something shrouded and pallid rose there, something that would not answer to the bookshelves. However, I looked at it. It was far too big to be my shirt thrown on a chair. Overcoming a childish terror, I threw back the bedclothes and thrust my leg out of bed. Instead of coming out of my truckle bed upon the floor, I found my foot scarcely reach the edge of the mattress. I made another step, as it were, and sat up on the edge of the bed. By the side of my bed should be the candle and the matches upon the broken chair. I put out my hand and touched nothing. I waved my hand in the darkness, and it came against some heavy hanging, soft and thick in texture, which gave a rustling noise at my touch. I grasped this and pulled it. It appeared to be a curtain suspended over the head of my bed. I was now thoroughly awake and beginning to realize that I was in a strange room. I was puzzled. I tried to recall the overnight circumstances and found them now, curiously enough, vivid in my memory. The supper, my reception of the little packages, my wonder whether I was intoxicated, my slow undressing, the coolness of my flushed face on the pillow. I felt a sudden distrust. Was that last night or the night before? At any rate, this room was strange to me, and I could not imagine how I had got into it. Dim, pallid outline was growing paler, and I perceived it was a window, with the dark shape of an oval toilet glass against the weak intimation of the dawn that filtered through the blind. I stood up and was surprised by a curious feeling of weakness and unsteadiness. With Trembling hands outstretched, I walked slowly towards the window, getting, nevertheless, a bruise on my knee by a chair either way. I fumbled round the glass, which was large, with handsome brass sconces, to find the blind cord. I could not find any. By chance I took hold of a tassel, and with a click of a spring, the blind ran up. I found myself looking out upon a scene that was altogether strange to me. The night was overcast, and through the flocculent grey of heaped clouds there filtered a faint half-light of dawn. Just at the edge of the sky, the cloud canopy had a blood-red rim. Below, everything was dark and indistinct, dim hills in the distance, a vague mass of buildings running up into pinnacles, trees like spilt ink. And below the window, a tracery of black bushes and pale grey paths. It was so unfamiliar that for a moment I thought myself still dreaming. I felt the toilet table. It appeared to be made of some polished wood, and was rather elaborately furnished. There were little cut glass bottles and a brush upon it. There was also a queer little object, horseshoe shape, it felt, with smooth, hard projections lying in a saucer. I could find no matches or candlestick. I turned my eyes to the room again. Now the blind was up. Faint spectres of its furnishings came out of the darkness. There was a huge curtained bed, and the fireplace at its foot had a large white mantle with something of the shimmer of marble. I leant against the toilet table and shut my eyes and opened them again. Then I tried to think. The whole thing was far too real for dreaming. I was inclined to imagine that there was still some hiatus in my memory as a consequence of my draught of that strange liqueur, that I had come into my inheritance, perhaps, and suddenly lost my recollection of everything since my good fortune had been announced. Perhaps, if I waited a little, things would be clearer to me again. And my dinner with old Elvesham was now singularly vivid and recent. The champagne, the observant waiters, the powder, and the liqueurs. I could have staked my soul that it all happened just a few hours ago. And then occurred a thing so trivial and yet so terrible to me that I shiver now to think of that moment. I spoke aloud. I said, "How the devil did I get here?" And the voice was not my own. It was not my own. It was thin, the articulation was slurred, the resonance of my facial bones was different. And then, to reassure myself, I ran one hand over the other and felt loose folds of skin, the bony laxity of age. "Surely," I said in that horrible voice that had somehow established itself in my throat, "surely this is a dream." Almost as quickly as if I did it involuntarily, I thrust my fingers into my mouth. My teeth had gone. My fingertips ran on flaccid surface of an even row of shriveled gums. I was sick with dismay and disgust. I felt then a passionate desire to see myself, to realize at once in its full horror the ghastly change that had come upon me. I tottered to the mantel and felt along it for matches. As I did so, a barking cough sprang through my throat, and I clutched at the thick flannel nightdress I found about me. There were no matches there, and I suddenly realized that my extremities were cold. Sniffing and coughing, whimpering a little perhaps, I fumbled back to bed. "It is surely a dream," I whispered to myself as I clambered back. "Surely a dream." It was a senile repetition. I pulled the bedclothes over my shoulders, over my ears. I thrust my withered hand under the pillow and determined to compose myself to sleep. Of course, it was a dream. In the morning, the dream would be over, and I should wake up strong and vigorous again to my youth and studies. I shut my eyes and breathed regularly, and finding myself wakeful, began to count slowly through the powers of 3. But the thing I desired would not come. I could not get to sleep, and the persuasion of the inexorable reality of the change that had happened to me grew steadily. Presently I found myself with eyes wide open, the powers of three forgotten, and my skinny fingers upon the shriveled gums. I was indeed suddenly and abruptly an old man. I had in some unaccountable manner fallen through my life and come to old age in some way. I had been cheated of all the best of my life, of love, of struggle, of strength, of hope. I grovelled into the pillow and tried to persuade myself that such hallucination was possible. Imperceptibly, steadily, the dawn grew clearer. At last, despairing of further sleep, I sat up in bed and looked about me. A chill twilight rendered the whole chamber visible. It was spacious and well-furnished, better furnished than any room I had ever slept in before. A candle and matches became dimly visible on a little pedestal in a recess. I threw back the bedclothes and, shivering at the rawness of the early morning, albeit it was summertime, I got out and lit the candle. Then, trembling horribly, so that the extinguisher rattled on its spike, I tottered to the glass and saw Elvesham's face. It was nonetheless horrible, because I had already dimly feared as much. He had already seemed physically weak and pitiful to me. But now, dressed only in that coarse flannel nightdress that fell apart and showed the stringy neck seen now on my own body, I cannot describe its desolate decrepitude. The hollow cheeks, the straggling trail of dirty grey hair, the rheumy, bleared eyes, the quivering, shriveled lips, the lower displaying a gleam of pink interior lining, and those horrible dark gums showing. You, who are of mind and body together at your natural years, cannot imagine what this fiendish imprisonment meant to me. To be young and full of desire and energy of youth, and to be caught and presently be crushed in this tottering ruin of a body. And there we end part 2 of The Story of the Late Mr. Elvesham by H.G. Wells. Tune in tomorrow for the final chapter of this story. See you then.